Recording. Okay, let's do it.
Very good. Welcome, my lords, to the Well-Earned Comforts podcast. I'm Sam.
And I'm Seth.
Thank you for joining us on the Walls of Isengard as we explore the many works of Tolkien and, of course, discuss life. We're glad to have you as part of the fellowship, as there's no telling where we'll be slept off to. It's sounds like I've got a 5-month-old. I do. I slept like 2 hours last night. Swept off to is where we will be headed, and today we don't even know where we're going because we get the absolute honor and pleasure of being joined today by the High King of the Noldor, Feanor himself, Mr. Alpha Chad. Dude, welcome to the podcast. Would you mind just kind of introduce yourself a little bit? Share what you're willing to share. You've got that dark screen there. I mean, you're fitting the vibe well. Yeah, just kind of give us a little idea.
Yeah. So I'm a massive Tolkien fan. Decided to create my Twitter X account, whatever they're calling the site these days. Back in 2021, 2020, somewhere in there, and just talking about Middle Earth, talking about history, things like that. And then Rings of Power happened, and
Yes,
that's when kind of everything exploded for me, at least on that platform. Just talking with fellow Tolkien fans like you guys, and just getting more involved in the Tolkien community as a whole. So, but yeah, that's pretty much. I talk Tolkien in fantasy, and I love every second of it. So
yeah,
that's more or less the lowdown of it. So.
We're thrilled to have you, man. I know I've interacted with you with you for a while on Twitter, and I don't know, just watching you go with the Rings of Power people and just pointing out all the BS. It's like, honestly, I look at your feed and it's like, man, this is what I would do if I just had the time to do it, because you lay out everything in like a very, I don't know, it's a logical way that makes sense, where you're not just trashing Rings of Power fans, you're actually bringing quality rebuttals to all their, quite frankly, all their BS. And I just love it.
That's kind of that's kind of the thing is I don't want to be one of those people, like you see a lot of people out there who will say oh, this show sucks just because X corporation made it, or this show sucks because it has X actor in it, or it has a woman who's a lead, or whatever the hell. It's like, no, I want to dig deep into this and explain exactly why this show is bad, from a adaptation standpoint and also from a writing standpoint, because the two can be mutually exclusive.
Yeah,
a show can stand on its own, even if it's not necessarily adhering to the source material. And I'd acknowledge if the show was good on that, on that front, but it fails on both counts. And I at least like to think that I've illustrated that pretty well. So,
you definitely have, and like I said, I've very much appreciated watching you dismantle their arguments piece by piece.
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna tell you, man, when you get to the point where you have a whole fan base who wants to find out your personal information, that's when you know you've made it, man. When you're disliked that much. But no. It's fun, and it gives me an opportunity not just to like trash a show, but like I like to talk Tolkien, and when and it's like dig deep into characters. Like one of my biggest things lately has been on the topic of um, Sauron, orcs, etc., being irredeemably evil. And I go strictly based on the actions of the character. Okay, I'm not going to go into the meta of what Tolkien was, debating with himself about in regards to these characters. I'm going based on, if I set foot into that world, as it is written, is this character evil or not? Is this character good or not? What are their traits? If I was to meet this person, would I, be comfortable being around this particular character? So on, so on, so on. And I base that strictly off of the text. And so when I see, just as an example, when I see people say, well, Sauron is a morally gray character, this, that, and the other, and it's like, okay, well, let's look at things that he did. He fed captives to Shelob. He tormented Gorlim and told him his wife was alive and that they were going to be reunited, and then he had him cruelly killed after revealing, haha, I kind of lied. I don't think we need to talk about what he did in Numenor. That's self-explanatory. I mean,
very
for sure.
Like there's all these things. What he did to the group that was with Finrod and Beren, so on and so on. It's like, that's the kind of thing. That's the way I approach the lore. Is a very matter of fact. Because Tolkien's all about escapism. You're escaping into that world. And if you're going to do that, you have to look at the characters as they are in that world, not as the author might have, I don't want to say intended, but things that, like I said, he was debating with. Because he was debating with a lot of stuff. He was
Yeah.
debating with, whether he wanted orcs to be evil, and this, that, and the other. But ultimately, this is what the text lays out. This is what we have to follow if we're going to be talking about this kind of stuff. So, sorry, I know that was a long-winded rant, but it's important to me to just kind of explain, my thought process in terms of evaluating and, talking about the lore. So,
yeah, no,
yeah.
that's great. I know Sam and I sometimes get lost in the minutia of what did Tolkien intend, and that's a big, based on his life experiences and all that. Sam and I really do take that angle a lot of times, but it is interesting to hear your perspective of, okay, I'm getting placed in Middle Earth. How am I going to experience the world? And I mean, that's actually a little reflection that I should start doing a little bit as well, because that's a fantastic way of kind of figuring out each of these characters. And I'm interested to see how you bring that towards our discussion here in a minute with Feanor, because I'm sure from that perspective, you've got some pretty interesting insights.
I do have quite a few, actually.
But, yeah, I'll be interested to see how you use that logic in that formula that you just said for Sauron and make a case for Feanor. But before we get into that, let's jump into some riddles of in the dark, not of the dark, riddles in the dark. So this is the part of the podcast where Seth and I always try to stump one another with a phrase of or a collection of dialogue from our trilogy book. If you've got one of those, Mr. Noldor, I don't know if you do. You can find something online too if you want. That's totally fine.
I got all the books here. Give me just a second here.
I'm sure you do. I'm sure you do. Dumb question. I don't even know why I asked it.
I got my Chinese copy of the Silmarillion here.
That'll do.
Goodness.
You can read it.
No, I got it because it's a gorgeous book. I'll share a picture with you guys later. No, I got Silmarillion, Lord of the Rings, all that sort of stuff here. So
cool. Very good. Well, how about let's do it this way. Let's so you kind of get the idea of what we do. I will find some dialogue for Seth. Seth, you can find some dialogue for Feanor here, and Feanor can find some dialogue for me. That way we can kind of everyone gets hit here. But I'll go ahead and start off. And if you don't know already, Seth is always 100% pretty much on this. I'd say like 80% on this, where I'm at like 30% probably. So
it's definitely not easy. There's some challenges to it for sure.
It is just a random spot too. You're not like trying to find a hard one. Maybe you luck out. Most of the time, I'm like, really, I have to say this? Okay, fine, because it's fairly easy to set. But he knows his books to his point. So I'll go ahead and start. Let me flip through here, find something.
So again, we try to find some dialogue that's 1 to 3 sentences, give or take, without saying the name of the character that's speaking, and then you have to try to guess the name of the character and then the context of the conversation.
Oh, I know exactly what I'm going to grab in that case.
See
I love it.
There we go.
All right.
Cool. All right, Sam, what do you have?
Okay. In the north, after the war and the slaughter of the Gladden Fields, the men of Westernese were diminished, and their cities of Anuminas, Lake Evendim, Anuminas, thank you, fell into ruin, and the heirs of Valindil removed and dwelt at Fornost in the high.
Yeah, that's Elrond at the Council of Elrond giving the backstory, isn't it?
That is very, 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 very correct.
I like it. That's a good one. That's actually my favorite chapter in all the Legendarium is the Council of Elrond. It's just lore dump after lore dump after lore dump.
Yeah, that was pretty. I shouldn't have read as much as I did, but you probably would have got it anyway. I opened up to one that I'd actually had already done, and I was like, oh, I can't do this one. So I flipped like 2 pages, and it's okay.
That's all right. That's all right. So, High King, are you ready here, my friend?
I sure hope so. I'm a little rusty, if I'm being honest, on the Lord of the Rings, because I've been doing a Silmarillion book club reading, so I've been very buried in the Silmarillion. So
I'm down to switch it up. Do you want me to grab the Silmarillion?
No, go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead.
All right. This one's actually rather obscure, so I'd be impressed if you're able to get it. So I might give you a little bit extra. So here we go. It says, "Yes, sir, I'm afraid so, sir," said blank, mistaking me. "He got at them in spite of all that I could do, and they took up with him."
Oh man. Okay.
It's pretty challenging.
Gotta guess.
It's. Oh, I want to say it's one of the hobbits.
Do you want another sentence?
Yeah, give me another sentence.
Sure. Just following that, it's, "They behaved very queer all the time that they were here. Willful, you might say."
Oh, damn it.
It's
Oh,
a
why am
pretty
I
obscure
struggling?
one.
Oh man, you're putting me on the spot. I'm drawing a blank, if I'm being honest with you.
All right, let me give you the
I got a
very.
guess.
All right, so Sam, hold your
Well,
guess.
yeah.
Let's see. I'm gonna give him
Yeah,
one
yeah.
more, and this
Okay.
this one will probably give it away here.
Okay.
Ass, fool, thrice worthy and beloved Barlaman.
Oh, they're in Bree.
Yeah.
I can't. Yeah. Yep. I know which one it is now. Oh man. No, I'm not gonna look. I need to remember what the chapter's called. I know exactly the scene now. Yeah. They're talking to Barlam and Butterbur.
Yep. So
Well,
kind of. It's not the hobbits that are talking to him.
What was it, Gandalf?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So oddly enough, Sam and I, we both randomly open our books. This is actually straight from the Council of Elrond as well. When
Mm-hmm.
Gandalf is explaining to the hobbits and the rest of the council, well, I guess Frodo and Sam, why he was late.
Oh shoot, that's right.
That's a hard one, though. I'll be honest. That's a very hard one.
I'm a little ashamed of myself. I didn't think of it though.
That's all right. You win some, you lose some.
Right.
But now we have to put the big E on our podcast because you read that dialogue out loud, man. Come on.
Right.
Just kidding.
All right, so it's my go.
Yep.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
Sam's gonna give it a go here.
Okay. Okay. All right. So, and it's just like the first like 2 or 3 lines you say.
Yeah, give or take.
Whatever feels like whatever sounds good. Like
Okay.
not too much, not too little.
Gotcha. "Not first will I die here," he cried, and he seized blank with the strength of his great anguish and wrath. He lifted him on high
Yep,
and shook
this
him as if
is.
he were a dog.
Oh wait, never mind. I thought I at first I was thinking this was Sam in the Shelob's lair, and
I'll give
like when he's.
I'll
But
give you a little bit more. "Blank of the thrall folk, did you say, you son of dastards, thief, slave of slaves?"
oh, we're not in the.
I was gonna say
We're
this
not in the
sounds.
Lord of the Rings here. This is Children of Hurin. This is when Hurin is.
Good. All right.
Yeah, this is this is when he went back to his after he was convinced by Glaurung to go back home because his wife
Yep.
and or his mom and sister were
Supposedly still there.
thralls, supposedly, yeah. And then
It's
he chucks
Oh,
a
go
guy
ahead.
across the table, breaks his neck, right?
Breaks his neck. Yeah, it's my favorite exchange of dialogue in the entire Legendarium is when Turin just absolutely loses his marbles in the Easterling. It's so great.
That's awesome.
Yeah, well
I love
done,
it. Very
Sam.
good. Well done. Well done.
That was a little bit of a curveball, and you nailed
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Well,
was like, Legendary? Okay, we'll throw Children of Hurin at him. Why not?
that was good. That was good.
Yeah.
We just did a read through not too long ago of that, so it's still fairly fresh. And like
Right.
we went chapter by chapter and did a whole deep dive on it, so had a lot of dialogue around that. But yeah, that was good. Thank you. Very good.
Oh yeah.
Well, wonderful. Riddles in the Dark has been concluded, and so normally this is the part of the podcast where we would maybe babble like Butterbur a little bit. Kind of already did that, but also this is where we jump into the meat and potatoes of the podcast, which today is a very interesting and perhaps maybe a little
Controversial,
I don't
maybe?
know,
I don't know.
controversial. Sure, that's a good word for it.
It's not controversial at all. That's all.
But because we are blessed with the presence of the High Kingdom of Noldor, Feanor himself, he is going to make a case for himself. Because Seth and I, we've both had a lot of conversation around this character and just some of the podcasts we've done in the past. When we did our Silmarillion podcast or Silmarils podcast, we did kind of an overview of the Silmarils and talked a lot about Feanor, obviously the creator of those jewels. and kind of talked about how he's really just a kind of a jerk.
Wow,
Very selfish,
wow.
very prideful. But we are very excited to be maybe enlightened,
Yes.
perhaps by your take here. So I don't know where we want to start. Maybe you just want to give us your side, and we'll contradict or interject or whatever. I don't know.
Okay. So I like to start instead of at the beginning, I like to start kind of at the end. So
Ooh,
um of the Voyage of Arendelle and the War of Wrath. The entire
okay.
reason why the Valar um refused to go after Melkor Morgoth after the Silmarils were stolen in the death of Finwë was because of previous battles that they had with him where the lands were just rent asunder and there was just complete and total destruction. That was the overall reason why the Valar refused to intervene. The only problem with that excuse for them is the fact of when they finally did come over during the War of Wrath, the Valar never set foot in Beleriand. It was the
Hmm.
Vanyar, it was in the Maiar, and the remnants of the Noldor. So there really wasn't an excuse for them not to send that force already, but they refused to when Feanor decided to venture forth and try and get the jewels back and bring Morgoth to justice, more or less. Um, the I can't really excuse the burning of the ships. That's one where I'm like, okay, that was probably bad. You shouldn't have done it. It wasn't even bad on a moral level. It was just stupid to do that because you could have used the help. Um, but the big one everyone points to is the kinslaying. And I like to remind everybody that the Noldor were not the ones who started the violence at the kinslaying. That was the Teleri. Yes, the Noldor were trying to take the boats, steal them, you know, but it was actually the Teleri who were throwing the Noldor overboard, which caused the Noldor to draw their swords and thus kicked off the first kinslaying.
Okay. So if
So,
all right, well let's talk about the kinslaying a little bit then.
yes,
Um
yes. We built their harbors, they owed us one, and they didn't pay it back, and so we decided to take their boats, and yeah, that's the long and short of it.
so the way and I can kind of see that perspective.
Yeah.
But when they kind of have that dialogue and they argue back and forth,
Mhm.
um and I always forget the guy's name at
It was
Alquilande.
Olwe. It
Ole,
was
okay.
Olwe, yeah.
Yeah, he basically says like the ships know, like, you didn't build the ships. Yeah, you built the harbors and you helped us get settled here, and you basically convinced us to follow you to Valinor as the Noldor did.
Mhm.
But then the the Teleri basically say, but the ships, we didn't learn how to do that from you. You didn't help us. This is our contribution. And not only that, but he compares them to Feanor's Silmarils. He basically says, like, these are the works of our hands, just like the Silmarils are to you.
Yes.
And so how do you justify basically Feanor and the rest of the Noldor saying, we're taking these, and if you don't like it, shove off, we're gonna make it happen?
Well, here's my question. What harm was going to come to the boats by the Teleri? Because at this point, the Doom of Mandos hadn't come into effect. And Aussay had the Wrath of the Seas had not been riled up against the Noldor, which caused a number of those ships to get destroyed in the first place. So, what harm would have come to the Swan ships had the Teleri just said, "Okay, yeah, we'll sail you over there," and they just sailed the Noldor over there without any? I don't think there isn't a negative repercussion for the Teleri aiding the Noldor. Matter of fact, I would argue that the two of them should be on the same side, considering what Morgoth did didn't just affect the Noldor; it affected everybody. The darkening of Valinor affected literally everybody from the Valar down. Um,
Sure.
so I don't really see the hesitance or the reason behind the hesitance to not aid the Noldor in their time of need, and especially considering you have to think about Feanor is very distrusting of the Valar at this point.
Yes.
He sees the Valar as brethren of Melkor, and he is under the he assumes, and just like his half brother Fingolfin assumed, that the Teleri were told to hinder the Noldor.
And that's true.
Yeah.
But I do remember, and I don't know the exact wording, but there's quite a bit of dialogue between Feanor and them, and they're basically saying, like, we still trust the Valar. Like we came over here following you. We still trust them, and we don't want to, ruin that trust by aiding and abetting you breaking their will.
Well, it wasn't breaking their will though, because the Valar did say you're free to come and go as you please.
True.
And the thing of it is, it's one of those. I like to bring up the War of Wrath first because you like to look at things back in hindsight. If you
Sure.
have the Noldor, the Vanyar, and the Teleri pretty much at their max capabilities at that point, march over under the. You don't even need the Valar there. You just have them You have them go over to Beleriand with the blessings of the Valar, and they would have defeated Morgoth. I would think.
I think it's still a pretty tall task.
Well, I mean, look, I base that solely on the fact of look at the deeds that they accomplished under the Doom of Mandos. You Fingolfin versus Morgoth is the greatest duel in the history of fantasy.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And you have Finrod versus Sauron. Like the Noldor and Beleriand were very, very powerful. And if you have them at their max, I don't know. I just don't see, especially considering Morgoth at that time, he had Balrogs. He didn't have any dragons. All he had was really orcs and Balrogs. That's it. So,
just Balrogs.
My well, my big thing with the Feanor did nothing wrong. Obviously, Feanor did some stuff wrong.
Yeah.
I just think that he's a bit unfairly maligned as this evil character when there's a lot more at play when it came to his decision making.
Now, I don't disagree with that at all. I think there's, again, you look at evil like you just kind of described at the beginning of our podcast, like that aligns with Sauron, that aligns with Melkor, those guys, and like their thought and all their will is bent on control, power, and oppression. Really, is kind of how they look at what they want for themselves. Whereas Feanor is not that necessarily. He's just very hot-headed, very arrogant. He's selfish in the ways that he just wants these jewels back, and if he can get rid of the darkness at the same time, great. But I don't think he's kind of like that in between. I don't know, kind of that neutral, but his actions similar to Turin, I guess, in some ways. Like Turin just acted out of a lot of arrogance, negligence,
There's a
and
lot of the
because of
ends
that, people
justify
died.
the means. It was Feanor. The
Yeah,
way I see Feanor is the ends justify the means, and to him, returning the Silmarils to him and his sons was the end all be all, no matter what, and whatever gets in the way. Kind of like with the oath that they swore.
Yeah.
Anything that got in the way, they were just gonna pummel. And so, like Sam's saying with Turin and stuff, you have a soft spot for him, but at the same time, it just his actions. I personally, I don't think I can justify them.
Mm-hmm. Well, the thing is, I was just about to bring this up. Now I'm looking for the part here. I'm gonna have to quote it from memory. Um, when Finwë dies and Feanor finds out the news, this is where I said this is one of the reasons why I think Feanor is very unfairly maligned. A lot of people like to paint it as it was just his greed for power and his lust for the Silmarils that led him to all of these, all the actions that he did, like the kinslaying, the burning of the ships at Losgar, so on and so on. His biggest, his the largest contributor to his grief was the death of his father.
Yeah.
It says something to the effect of whom among the Noldor has loved their fathers more, something along those lines. I believe it's in the Darkening of Valinor. I have it right here. I just didn't want to waste too much time like digging through.
Sure.
But and so he's under it's not like Sauron where he commits to very, very cruel actions very casually for the pleasure of it. Whereas Feanor is being driven strictly by grief and emotion, which causes him to really look at people almost in a very, very twisted way. He
Hmm.
sees Fingolfin as a threat. He sees the Teleri as an obstacle. He's, in terms of like, getting his vengeance. Um, and so where I do think he did some bad things wrong, like I said, I find him to be very, very unfairly maligned. Um,
I could see
the
that.
the what was I gonna say?
I think going back to the kinslaying, sorry, real quick, going back to the kinslaying. I mean, you mentioned like what would go wrong about having the boats.
Yeah,
like
what would go wrong about
just
having
lending the boats off.
Yeah.
And it wasn't so much that as the Teleri were grieved by the. It says they were grieved indeed at the going of their kinsfolk and long friends, but rather dissuade them than aid them. No ship would they lend, nor helping their building. And then later down, Ole answers Feanor after Feanor's like, "What the heck, man? Give me the boats." He's getting all mad at him. Ole responds, "We renounce no friendship, but it may be the part of a friend to rebuke a friend's folly."
Yes.
And I think that's his way of just like, I don't think there was any like malice intent there. They're just saying like, this isn't a really good idea. Have you thought about this? Like, let's talk about this. We're not hasty folk, like elves really.
Right.
I mean, I guess first age elves are a bit more than third age elves, obviously, but
true.
He's acting very hasty and he's not willing to listen to any counsel.
True, but I also, again, I think we're looking at it in hindsight too, because what ended up happening in the end? They sent a host of elves across the sea, and that ended up defeating Melkor. So all they did in, I guess, prohibiting, that's not the right word, but cautioning Feanor to wait, and everything that happened ultimately just delayed the inevitable. And considering, I believe, Mandos, Manwë, they have, to an extent, a degree of foresight. You would think that they would have said, let's just go over there and make mincemeat of Melkor real quick and bring him back for justice. Like it just considering the actions that they committed to at the end of the first age, it doesn't make any sense to why they wouldn't give Feanor 100% backing. Why did it take? Why did it take Arendelle and Elwë?
Yeah, I think you look at Feanor though in this mindset that he's at, and I don't think his purpose was to go and bring Melkor back to justice. I think he just wanted to get the Silmarils. Whether he, whatever happened to Melkor, he didn't really care. I think at this point, he was driven by he just wanted revenge on Melkor for the death of his father and for the stealing of his Silmarils. And if he gets his Silmarils back, well, then maybe there's a part of him that can be okay with what has happened, and he can kind of move on with his life. Yeah, that's obviously why we have the oath of Feanor as well. But I don't think he was really cared about justice.
That's where Feanor went wrong, was the oath of Feanor, swearing an oath to Eru Ilúvatar, an unbreakable oath where the everlasting darkness would take them if they didn't fulfill it.
And binding all his sons to it as well.
Yeah, and binding all his sons to it. That was stupid. Okay, that was extremely dumb. He shouldn't have done that. But and here's the other thing too is, the Valar, the Teleri, everybody in Valinor knew exactly who Feanor was from a temperamental perspective. I mean, this is the same guy who drew a sword on his younger brother. I mean, just in a power struggle, and he's the only being who ever was it the quote? He slammed his doors in the face in the mightiest of all of Arda. Everybody in Valinor knew his temperament. So
his name even means Spirit of Fire, and his mom
Spirit of Fire.
His mom died giving birth to him, and basically said I won't have any more kids because what would have nourished many children all went into Feanor.
Into this one, which I heard a hilarious, really dumb fan theory about that, but we'll talk about that later. It's really stupid. Long story short, that Feanor was actually is it the everlasting flame? I'm trying to remember. Eru Ilúvatar,
the imperishable flame.
Imperishable flame. That Feanor was the physical manifestation of that. And I'm like, no, that's not how that works.
Sorry. Don't think so.
But anyway, no, it's what was I gonna say?
So there's a couple of things in here that I actually went through the histories of Middle Earth a little bit, and I can't pronounce the word. It's like the Shilabot of Feanor or whatever it's called.
The Shilabeth, or
Shilabeth, maybe. Yeah. And so I don't know how much of this is considered canon or made it into the Silmarillion necessarily. I don't really remember. But the one action, and I took some notes, and we can maybe go over some of these. But a couple of things. His wife Narendelle, they became estranged, and when he decided to leave, and she basically came and begged him to stay, and then she tried to talk his youngest son into staying as well, and he
He
almost
called her an
stayed but
ungrateful.
decided not
Yeah.
to.
Yeah. Hmm.
And then she basically told Feanor, like, if you do this, not all your sons will set foot in Beleriand.
Hmm.
And kind of moving forward into the burning of the ships. And this is where you might know better than I do if this is actually in the Silmarillion or if it's just in the histories of Middle Earth. But
I already know what you're talking about.
he
It's
he
his
he
youngest
burned
son
him.
was on the
Yeah.
boat. Yeah, that is not in the Silmarillion.
Okay.
That was something that J.R.R. Tolkien was playing around with, and I think Christopher Tolkien ultimately came to the decision that he didn't do that.
Okay.
Both his youngest in the Silmarillion, both of the youngest sons of Feanor were killed in the second kinslaying. No. It wasn't the second. It was the third kinslaying. Um, because they were the last four, as the two oldest and the two youngest. I'm pretty sure.
Okay.
Um, and so yeah, I believe that's what Christopher ended up going with, was that his youngest wasn't on. I believe was it Amrod or
I
Amras?
think
I
it
want
was
to say it was Amras.
Amras, I believe.
Yeah, it was Amras. Yeah, that Amras wasn't on the boat when they set fire to him,
Okay.
because I remember that because Feanor was aggrieved
Mm-hmm.
in that that uh, edition of the tale, I guess would be the best way to put it.
Right.
After he found out that he inadvertently killed his own kid. Um, but no, that's not in the Silmarillion. I don't believe that's. I think that one is kind of like the origin of Gilgalad, where
Yeah.
they have him either being the son of Erodreth or they have him being the son of Fingon. It's kind of fan choice on that one, whatever you want
Sure.
to believe. Um, but
So I got a question,
yeah, what's up?
and I mean this is like just whatever you kind of make of it. The
Yeah.
Oath of Feanor
Mhm.
is something again, like that's what you said. Yeah, I agree. That was wrong. That was stupid. That was
That was
messed up.
stupid. Yeah.
Do you, do you genuinely think like was this just Feanor's character like being like we're gonna I don't care if we die doing this, like this is the plan, this is what we're gonna put our lives to, or do you think he legitimately thought there was a possibility of him getting him back?
I think the first one, because
Hmm.
when the emissary of Manwë comes to speak with him, he says, at least we're not going to be sitting here idly by doing nothing. We're at least going to do something, even if it ends up being a complete failure. At least we're not going to be like the value. So I think Feanor knew deep down, like he probably was outmatched in this regard, but he just didn't care. Like,
Yeah.
it was just,
Sure.
one of those deals where it's like, like you were said, like we're gonna fight and we're gonna die, and he says it when the doom of Mandos is proclaimed, they're gonna be singing songs about us, you know, you know,
Hmm.
and we're not gonna be labeled as cowards essentially. So yeah,
Okay.
I definitely go with the first one. He probably knew deep down that he was gonna lose, but he just didn't care.
I think
Right.
that's
Fair enough.
accurate.
Yeah,
I think that's
yeah.
accurate. One of the things I wanted to kind of pick your brain about is
Mm.
um, Galadriel in Valinor. So
Mhm.
she, it's speculated, and I don't know how canonical it is, but I'm pretty sure it's considered canon where Feanor made the Silmarils
Yes.
because of seeing Galadriel's hair and the beauty of it, and he wanted to recreate those in any way,
Yes.
create the Silmarils based on her hair.
Mhm.
Um, but she refused to give him even just a single tress of her hair. However, come Third Age and the Fellowship is entering Lothlorien, Gimli
Mhm.
asks for one tress and gets three.
Gets
Um,
3.
so what do you think is the connection there? Did she sense something in him? Why was she so opposed to him?
Well, Galadriel by her nature, and this is one of the things that the Rings of Power fan base gets wrong on a
I
consistent basis.
was wondering
She
how long
was
it would take.
it's like the trigger word for me. No,
Yep.
she was incredibly wise and discerning, particularly with people's character. And with Feanor, she did not like in any way the hot-headed temperament of Feanor at all. And she knew what, you know, part of his craftsmanship was that it was almost it's kind of like what did in Caleb Linville to me was like a yearn for knowledge. And Feanor and his sons would often go like to the edges of Valinor and be, just searching for different things and this and that. And the Galadriel did not like that. She had a bad feeling about Feanor from the get-go. And then obviously with the kinslaying and everything that transpired after that, um, she would probably want to do something like, giving the 3 strands of hair to Gimli. That would be almost like not necessarily in spite, because Galadriel wasn't a spiteful character, but definitely, an action of rewarding this good and pure-hearted character with the thing that was requested by the very morally complex, maybe you can say, I don't. I really hesitate to call Feanor evil because I don't believe he's an evil character, but definitely a very troubled character.
Yes.
Um,
and I think too, you look at like Feanor wanted to use Galadriel's hair for the Silmarils. He wanted to put the hair in the Silmarils, right? And was as opposed to like Gimli, he's just like, dude, I have nothing to ask for other than, well, okay, your hair's gorgeous. Like of all
gorgeous,
the
yeah,
gems in the
yeah,
world that I've seen, I know Mithril, I know gold, I know all these things, and this is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Just to have it and see that, like, look at it
yeah,
whenever I want to. Like, he
yeah.
didn't have any. He wasn't going to use it for anything. I
He
think
said
that
it was
also
going to be
changes it.
an heirloom of his house, if I recall correctly. Was that he
Yeah.
was going to set the hairs and gems and make them an heirloom of his house? It's actually really, really very like beautifully written scene. There
Mm,
the lines of dialogue for Gimli there.
yeah.
Well, and well, with the thing with Feanor, he wanted to. It was because Feanor was quoted as saying, "These are the greatest works of my hand. I will never make their like again." But he wanted to. He wanted to kind
Mm,
of capture that again, which is why he wanted the 3 strands of hair from Galadriel, because
okay.
Galadriel's hair captured the light of the 2 trees. Um, and that's why he wanted it, and Galadriel refused. And obviously, killing her kinsfolk didn't help at all.
Right.
No.
Right.
Because it stated very clearly she fought on the side of the Teleri against the sons of Feanor.
Right. But then
Mm,
she followed him anyways.
Then she followed him
A little
anyway.
bit out
Well,
of revenge, though.
she followed Fingolfin,
Fair.
because the thing that I think kind of escapes that entire narrative is Fingolfin and Galadriel both had similar motives for going and crossing the Helcaraxe into Beleriand. They both wanted to get their hands on Feanor bad
True.
because obviously the kinslaying for Galadriel, and then Fingolfin being abandoned. He was not too fond of Feanor for the burning of the ships. Knowing that he had been betrayed. Um, but no, Galadriel. I mean, we can go on a whole thing with her. But to I guess answer your question, um, I really think it was just a case of Galadriel, especially considering her character, not development, but her progress into eventually, overcoming the temptation of the ring and everything that happened in the Third Age. Um, um, and everything that happened prior in her life, all kind of led to a lot of um, the English language is escaping me right now. I can't think of the right word, but definitive things taking place at the end prior to her leaving for Valinor again. There were certain things that I guess kind of gave her closure, would be
Sure.
the best way to put it.
mm,
And I'm guessing that the hair to Gimli was probably one of those things as well. Finding closure with everything that happened with Feanor and the Silmarils and everything else like that. So
I never kind of put that together, but yeah, it's kind of wrapping up the tale in a way,
mhm,
like start to finish,
exactly.
closing the door on that.
Yeah. Setups and payoffs, I guess, would be the best way to,
Yeah.
or in a way, yeah,
So I know we're kind of just bouncing around Feanor's life like crazy, which is fine.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
I'm all for it.
yeah.
But so after Morgoth and Ungoliant came and sucked the life out of the trees and removed the light from Valinor,
Mhm.
uh, and I always get them mixed up. I believe it was Yavanna said that she could potentially recreate the trees if Feanor broke open his Silmarils because they contained some of the light, uh,
Yes.
and then as such, relight Valinor back to the bliss. Melkor's gone, or Morgoth at this point, he's gone, whatever.
Yeah.
Um, so I understand why he didn't, because he says, like, "These are the works of my hand that I can't recreate," and
Yeah.
it would basically be like ripping my heart apart to do it.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on, should he have for the betterment of everybody, or do you kind of give him a little bit of a pass in there?
I give him a little bit of a pass considering the fact of again, and I can't remember whether or not he had found out by this point that Finwë had died.
Hmm.
But this is
Mm.
going back to his father being killed. His head definitely wouldn't have been in the right place. And even Aule says, do not be hasty to ask him for this because you ask of something that's greater than you know. You know,
Right.
like matter of fact, let me find the exact quote here. But yeah, I would, given the fact that the Valar ended up kind of inadvertently solving their problem anyway by creating the sun and the moon. I don't think that it would have been particularly necessary for him to break open the Silmarils anyway.
Sure.
Um,
That's a very logical way of putting it, but do you think,
yeah,
from Feanor's personality, and maybe he just is incapable of this, but if he would have done an act so selfless for the betterment of everybody else that perhaps it changes the trajectory of his life, or do you think that it's just impossible, for just because he is the spirit of fire, he's not capable of sacrificing of himself for others?
I think it would have been impossible because of the distrust that Melkor had wrought.
Mm.
Um, I really get the feeling that he it says it in the Silmarillion. He thought himself in a ring surrounded by enemies when
Yeah,
he's in the presence of the Valar. Um, he I think given what Melkor did and the mindset of Feanor, I think that is what would have made it more impossible. I don't think that Feanor necessarily would have been incapable of that kind of selfless action. I will say this. I will say this. Had Finwë survived and just the Silmarils were stolen, I think Feanor would have been more inclined
okay.
to do it.
Mm.
But I always lean into the thing with his dad. I really believe that that's really what kind of tipped the scales. Because the Silmarils were one thing, but if Finwë had survived, I think he could have like evened out Feanor's mood to
Mm.
where like he would have tried to because he made peace with Fingolfin in
Yeah.
the presence of Finwë, after their altercation. So he's not devoid of reason. But when you have back-to-back events of catastrophic proportions occur, and you're of the temperament that he has, I just think, accumulating all those circumstances put together, I don't think that I don't think it would have been possible for him to do it.
So I always like to look at Tolkien's works through the lens of his actual experiences. Like obviously
Yeah.
Tolkien was brilliant. He has a lot of experience, through
Mhm.
World War I, through being an orphan, all these other things. And
Yeah.
I kind of wonder, like, he has a few different, like, really big characters whose fathers pass away either at a young age or a little bit later on, like with Feanor. And
Mhm.
I wonder too if maybe he's either subconsciously or consciously like creating different pathways of what he could have done with his life through these characters. Like you look at Aragorn, and after Arathorn got stuck in the eye with an arrow, like what did Aragorn do? He was able to kind of find himself and stay on a noble path, whereas Feanor, after losing his dad, it's like, okay, well, I just don't know what to do now. I have all this anger, I have all this like rot within me, like you mentioned, like,
Right.
and he just kind of blows up on everybody because of that. And I kind of wonder if that's his way of, I mean, not just Aragorn. There's like Turin loses his dad, kind of. He doesn't
Yeah.
really know his dad, and so, but just kind of having different pathways for these characters is his way of kind of playing out his own life. Like, well, if I could have taken this route of just being completely bitter and angry, and then we wouldn't have any of the stories we have.
Right.
I don't know.
Right.
I just like to
Exactly.
look at it through that.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I think also a part of that is kind of reflecting on himself as a father. Like, how has my parentage affected my kid or my children, and how, if I was gone, how would they, you
Mhm.
know, um, how would they behave? How would they react? Obviously, you look at Christopher Tolkien, he was when he was alive, he was very, very protective of his father's works, almost
Yep.
to a psychotic degree, if we're being honest. Like he was extremely, and I appreciate him for it because you know prior to his death, we didn't get crap like Rings of Power. You know,
It's very true.
so he was the end all be all of gatekeeper.
And he also made sure that, everything
Yeah,
came out. I mean, the
yeah,
Silmarillion, which was Tolkien's like love child, wasn't even
yeah.
published while he was alive.
Hmm.
And Christopher made that happen in the end.
Yeah, and I think it's um what was said about him growing up without a father and how how he handled it, and also being a father as well and seeing the effect that he was having on his kids. And honestly, I've read the Father Christmas letters. Obviously, he was a very good father,
Yeah.
I think. But just using, like you said, just using his life experience. You're absolutely right. Um, and also from a third person perspective or from a first person perspective rather, of seeing the effect he was having on his kids. I think both culminated into kind of that that going into his characters, like with Feanor and Finwë, and um, also the odd one that is Denethor and Faramir.
Yeah.
That dynamic.
Yeah,
Um,
very true.
but um, but yeah, definitely his his um his life experience. And another thing too is because he served in the First World War, so he probably saw a lot of sons lose their dads.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's another aspect of it too, to come to think of it, is again, from just from his POV, seeing that happen to God knows how many kids,
Yeah, I'm
and
sure,
seeing him
especially
react.
going back to Oxford to teach after World War One,
Yeah,
that was
yeah,
a whole generation of, male students that were coming in that he was teaching that were too young to go to, the trenches, but they
yeah,
probably all lost their dads during
yeah. They all
during the
lost their
war.
dads, so he probably saw all manner from being a teacher in that position. You know, um, saw the effect it was having on kids. Yeah, absolutely. Um,
So,
which,
I guess from this perspective, I can have a bit more grace for Feanor in this
yeah,
sense. I think
yeah,
again, you look at some of the other characters of Tolkien's that chose to
yeah,
be more wise and a little less hasty and
yeah,
foolhardy with their emotions. But yeah, I
yeah.
guess I can see like that being your kind of main argument. I think overarching, it's a good argument.
Yeah, the overarching argument that I've always had is that he is not. I hate when people who only read into tiny bits of the book determine that he's an evil character when there's a lot more at play.
sure.
Did he commit to some evil deeds? Absolutely. Morally evil deeds, but you have to understand the circumstances behind those deeds
Yeah,
and really put them in their proper context. Again, it's not like we talked about Sauron earlier. Sauron just fed captives to Shelob for the crack of it.
Yeah.
Like Feanor wasn't doing that. He was acting out of emotion and rage. Because of all of these things that had happened to him in his own life, and by extension, had happened to his kin as well.
I
So,
think I think one of the main things that this actually just struck me. I think one of the reasons he seems evil to a lot of people that don't understand the complexities to his character
mhm,
is when you compare him to the other elves in Middle Earth, he, him and his sons are really the only ones. I mean, I guess you could get into like Maglor or not
mhm.
Maglor, the Dark Elf. Um,
Oh, Ale.
yeah, Aeol and his son
Mhm,
Maglin. No, yeah,
mhm.
Maglin.
Yeah,
Um,
Meglin. Yeah.
yeah,
Mhm.
I think, aside from those two, Feanor and his sons are really the only elves that are kind of morally ambiguous in a way, in that you compare Feanor to Fingolfin or Finrod or even Galadriel or even some of the second and third age elves. It's like they're all pure and perfect in their own
Yeah.
right, but
Mhm.
he's not. So I wonder if that also taints people's perspective of him a little bit.
Well, I think there's another name that we should throw in there, and that is Elwë Singolo, Thingol of Doriath. I've always considered him a very morally great character as well.
mm,
Hmm.
His
interesting.
his his treatment of Baron was undeserved. He did not need to do that. Obviously, he saw the error of the ways and error of his ways in which he fostered Turin, but it was ultimately greed to an extent, greed that did him in
Yeah.
because he wanted to have the Silmaril and the Noglamir for himself, and
Yep.
thus started a war between the elves and the dwarves. You know, um, and he was unwilling to help the Noldor because of the kinslaying. When yes, you can be mad at the Sons of Feanor for that, you can be mad at Feanor for that, but there were plenty of other Noldor who were at because he refused to marshal his forces to go to the Battle of Unnumbered Tears. He permitted Mablung and Beleg Strongbow to go because they insisted that they were going, but he would not commit the full forces of Doriath to aid the Noldor because he was still bitter about the kinslaying.
Sure.
And holding on to that grudge, for lack of a better term, holding on to that hatred ultimately led to, in my opinion, being one of the causes why the Noldor lost that battle. Had Thingol showed up with the forces, the full might that he had, like Turgon did, you know, it could have changed the outcome. But it's like the Doom and Mandos said, mistrust and the slaying of kin and all manner of dislike is going to ultimately cause your downfall. Um, but yeah, like you were saying, yeah, Mablung or not Mablung, sorry, Maeglin, Eol, the sons of Feanor himself. Um, yeah, they are kind of the odd ones out when you look at the grander picture of the elves, definitely.
Not to derail the conversation too much, but Sam and I actually talk a lot about Thingol and Melian, and it's like Melian is just she's like the wisest person in all. I mean, Gandalf is up there for sure, but same with Gladriel, but like Melian is every time she speaks in the Silmarillion, it's like, hey, pay attention to this. This is gonna come back and bite you in the butt if you're not careful.
Yeah, that's why Galadriel went directly to her for tutoring immediately when she got over. Melian the Maya was arguably the wisest being in all of Arda at that point.
Yeah. So
and
real
Galadriel's
quick,
the only one that actually listened to her. So
yeah. Well, you say, well, yeah, you're not wrong
everybody
there.
else just
yeah, because Bellic should have listened to her. There's a malice on the sword. You shouldn't take it. He took it, ended up getting killed with it. Um, when Baron ends up going through Nandungortheb and breaks the girdle of Melian to get to Luthien. Yeah, it's yeah, she says a lot of wise things that people don't pay much heed to.
yeah.
Absolutely.
Real quick, we've got Feligund07 in our chat here, and he actually said the dwarves did him dirty, but being a little pretentious didn't help either. Of course, the Silmaril itself was the driving factor more so than his character, I think. And I tend to actually agree with that because of the oath that the Sons of Feanor swore. And even Melian warns Thingol of this when he first talks to Baron and basically tells Baron, like, yeah, good luck, go get this. Melian tells Thingol, he's like, you have now just wrapped yourself up in something far greater than you understand, and that is the doom of Mandos in regard to the Silmarils. So I do think he has a point that Thingol's actions later on are maybe more driven towards the Silmaril, kind of prompting those actions as opposed to his character necessarily.
Well, let me find there's a particular line of dialogue that I need to find here. It is
well, that's kind of also the theme too with Tolkien's works is it's always the the stuff that kind of is the motivation for greed, for evil, for all this kinslaying. What? Like just go down the list. It's the One Ring. It's the Silmarils. It's the Nalglamir. All these things, these precious items, and I think Tolkien, allegory aside, is really just highlighting the greed that is so easily entangles all of us, and how we can just so easily look at something so sparkly and bright and be like, I want that no matter what happens, I'm going to get it, not realizing what kind of wake it's going to leave in our midst.
Yeah, well, it says it right here. And in his wrath and pride, he gave no heed to his peril, but spoke to them in scorn, saying, "How do ye of uncouth race dare to demand aught of me, Elu Thingol?" Like, there's a lot of pride at play there,
That is true.
and you know, uh, mm, I yes, he got bound up in the oath, but I mean, I think it's like with anything else, the decisions you make ultimately are your own. It's not, the Silmaril isn't doing it, it's not having this mind control effect on anybody or anything like that. Unless I'm,
Yeah,
I'm misunderstanding what the person's saying. It's pretty much what I gathered was like ultimately the Silmaril was the root cause of it all, when really it was just Thingol was that kind of person who just didn't take any crap from anybody, and it ultimately did him in.
but the same could be said, kind of in rebuttal to that, of Feanor himself, right? Like the
Yeah.
actions, like the death of his father or the stealing of the Silmarils, like
Mhm.
ultimately he's still responsible for his own act. So I mean, it goes both ways, and it's like, where do
True.
you draw the line on
I would argue though, well,
Because you
they're a
can
bit.
also look at the Curse of Turin and be like, well, how much was
Mm,
him and how much was just Morgoth's curse on Turin and
that's
his family?
that's a very heavily debated topic
that?
too.
Yeah, we
But
talked a lot about that.
how much of it was really Morgoth's curse and more just Turin being an idiot?
Right.
Uh, but I mean, really, because if you change X, Y, and Z in that story, how different things might have been. Um, no, and you know what, Thingol and Feanor, it's funny you bring that up because I hadn't occurred to me just how kind of similar they are. Because in the Silmarillion, I believe it was when the sons of Feanor demanded that he give up the jewel, and he told them to f off. Essentially, he told them
Right.
no. And the reason why he told them no was because of the sacrifices that Beren and Luthien made to get it. You know, and I think it's a kind of the similar mindset of why Feanor left for Beleriand was because that kind of connection he had with his family member, you know, and wanting to do good by them. Although they obviously Feanor went to more extremes, obviously,
Right.
but it's a similar kind of mindset, I guess, is the point that I'm trying to make. Um, so yeah, um,
No, I think that's true. Um, I was gonna say I feel like we've maybe beat Feanor to a pulp here, not unlike Gothmog, but
Ooh.
right. Wow, wow, okay, okay, yeah,
no,
okay,
I
Got
just
him.
all right.
I just wanted to
It wasn't just Gothmog,
I
okay?
know, I know, I know.
Yeah.
I had to do it. I had to do it.
It's
Yeah.
good. It's good.
But I'm curious, kind of a hard transition. Just what are your
Yeah, yeah.
main gripes with Rings of Power? I want to take a few minutes because we're
Oh, good
already
lord.
coming up at about an hour on this podcast, so we try to keep them hour and 15. But I want to
Oh, good.
give a few
Yeah.
minutes here to see what your thoughts are on Rings of Power.
Do you have another like maybe 3-4 hours for me to get all this off my chest?
Let's
Oh,
speed run
dude.
it.
Okay, the writing is atrocious, the directing is atrocious. There isn't a single thing in the entire show that adheres to the canon at all. Literally, we can go scene by scene, and there is not a single canonical event that takes place that is shown in the show.
Hmm.
Literally there isn't anything.
Debatable.
It's
Debatable.
okay.
Sauron
Try me.
does look at Caleb and say, consider it a gift.
Oh Yeah, the same
That's
Celebrimbor
all I can think of.
who's supposed to be the greatest of one of the greatest elven smiths in history. And he doesn't know what a freaking alloy is. Yeah, get out of here with that. Well, and that's the thing too. Literally, I've said it 100 times. The only thing that is accurate to the source material is the name of some characters in some locations. That's it. You
Yeah.
can't say that there's zero in terms of events. There's zero in terms of accurate character portrayal. Galadriel is nothing like Galadriel in the books. Celebrimbor is nothing like Celebrimbor in the books. Elrond is nothing like Elrond in the books. Gilgalad, and so on and so on and so on and so on. Ar-Pharazôn, during the time prior to the sinking of Numenor, was not a fat bearded dude. He was a general and a king, and very, very
Sam
powerful.
actually, when when we were talking about it, Sam was like, "Yeah, the fat IT guy from the Geek Squad."
Yeah, exactly. Like, yes, Ar-Pharazôn was totally a neckbeard. Like,
Yeah.
no, that's not the way it went down. Um, Muriel is this headstrong, powerful, don't take no
She gets so
crap from
many
anybody
lines.
woman. But in the books, she was Muriel, who was forced to marry her cousin, and like, she was very
That's
kind of
about the extent of it.
yeah, exactly. Like she died grasping the cliffside of Mental. Was it Mental Tarma? I'm pretty sure it was Mental Tarma.
Yeah.
You know, before the sinking, ultimately took her too. Like, there I can if you ever want to see my example of the poor directing in this show, go look at the the Mount Doom eruption in, I think it's like episode 6. Watch the extras
Hmm.
because you will see the majority of extras are running towards the green screen, which is showing the volcanic eruption going towards them. I'm serious. Go and have a. There's another one too during a prison escape scene in the Orc Tunnel, whatever the hell stupid thing that was, where you have people hitting the dirt with sticks. You have the extras like just hitting dirt with sticks. They're not actually doing anything in the scene. They're just told like, here, go, just make movements, pretty much.
To be fair, you also see that when Theoden and Aragorn ride out of Helm's Deep in the Two Towers, all the people in the back are swinging at nothing on the Hornburg or whatever that is, the bridge.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
and they're it's kind of the same thing, but
No, it isn't. No, like, okay, that can be excused because it's a very, very, like, you got that's a very chaotic scene in the Hornburg.
yeah,
Whereas,
there's thousands of Urkai that they're running into, so sure, just keep it
yeah,
going until you hit
just keep the
something. Yeah,
movement going.
yeah,
Exactly. Whereas this is a close-up shot
yeah,
of your
yeah.
extras who are supposed to be prisoners who are trying to make an escape. Like,
Sure, sure.
and don't get me started on the dialogue. The dialogue, the writing in this show is horrible.
Butt cheeks.
Oh, it's uh, I it's like, where do you even begin? Like I can just pick an episode and you can find 20, 30 different, lines of dialogue that just make absolutely no sense.
They tried so desperately to sound like Tolkien that they realized, like, they ended up just talking themselves in circles and saying a whole lot of nonsense when
Yeah,
trying to
it
sound profound.
yeah, they were trying to sound profound. Well, it was an overuse of prosaic language that really didn't have any meaning to it at all.
Yeah.
And also, you know, I don't know who the dialogue coach was for it, but i- in Tolkien's dialogue, and even in the Jackson movies, everything's said very matter of factly.
Mm,
It's two people that are speaking to one another. Yes, in the books you might see some, I guess, antiquated, words. Like for instance, saying someone is the son of dastards. Okay, that might not translate over into modern media exactly well, but it's still two characters having, just a plain conversation with one another. Whereas in Rings of Power, everything's overly flowery, overly prosaic. Um, it just like you said, it's meant to be very fanciful, but Tolkien's dialogue is nothing like that. It just came across as people who were told, okay, we need you guys to write a fantasy show. And they're like, okay, what does fantasy mean?
Mm.
Well, it means a lot of flowery language. You know, they didn't really actually take the. I'm still of the opinion nobody opened the books at Amazon. Not a single person did.
Which is wild
Um,
because they always said, like, go
yeah,
back to the books, go back to the books, go back to the books. And it's like,
it's the biggest.
you sure
It's the
about
biggest
that?
lie. It's the biggest lie ever told because when they were confronted about, and they talked about this on their podcast, and it's, if you want to see the most utter disrespect, check this out. So on their podcast, I forget what episode it was, like episode 8 or something. The showrunners were talking about how they rewrote the story of Sauron and Celebrimbor and the Forging of the Rings. And what they said, and I'm paraphrasing slightly, but they essentially said that Tolkien wrote the elves in a stupid manner and that the way that they wrote it in Rings of Power made more sense.
whoa.
Yeah, yeah. I'm paraphrasing slightly, but that's the gist of what they said. And it's like, okay, so you guys just don't care. What what I think the goal was of this television show was we have a name of a very famous intellectual property. We're going to slap the name of that intellectual property on this generic fantasy television show that we know if we called it something else, it would never get up off the ground.
Right.
We're going to market it strictly on identity politics. We're going to market it on the fact that we spent a gajillion dollars on it and pray to God that the IP sells because there hasn't been anything in the IP since the Hobbit movies. So people are going to be thirsty for something in Middle Earth.
Well, that's why I wonder if they actually were successful in that. I mean, we're talking about it still. I mean, I know it's going to be starting up again this year, apparently, but like, were they successful in what their vision for it was? Like, to get the money, to get the clicks, to get the views.
I don't think so. Number one, you have to look at the viewer retention rate. So after the first episode, how many people actually completed the season? You had 37% domestically, 45% internationally, which is terrible if you're spending $450 million on your first season of a TV show.
Sure.
The other part of it is, what is the vast majority of the conversation around this television show? It's overwhelmingly negative. And the reason why it's overwhelmingly negative is because Amazon didn't bother to do consumer research. The Tolkien fan base is not like your Star Wars fan base or your Marvel fan base, where you have a majority of people, and I mean this with all due respect to anybody who might be listening who's a fan of this, a fan of those properties. You have a majority of people in those properties who it literally will slop up anything. They will eat up anything. Where it's like, okay, we have the lightsabers and the flashing lights on screen. Let's watch and shell out dough to watch that stuff because that's the kind of thing we like. Whereas the Tolkien fan base, they're not like that. There's a deep love for the source material and the character development and the writing. That last one being the big one is the writing of the books and the quality therein. And when you see something that yes, Jackson took liberties with the books, but he did so to fit the medium in which he was trying to make an adaptation.
Yeah.
Whereas Rings of Power completely threw out the lore because the lore did not fit the kind of political and social messaging that they were trying to push with the IP, with the name.
Yeah, I go back to the whole like elves, are supposedly immortal in Tolkien's world, like they don't die from sickness or they can be killed, but whatever.
They go through life cycles, but yeah.
Right, but then Rings of Power comes around, and it's like, okay, we randomly get cancer that Mithril can cure, and it's like that's your one of your main plot points and drivers of this story is some completely asinine. Like, who even came up with that? It's just a dumb idea in the first place.
Where they really went off the rails was when they had a MAGA rally in the middle of Numenor. That was
They're gonna take their jobs.
Oh yeah, it was like full mask off moment. Like this is our message that we want to push to you.
Yeah.
We don't care about the lore. We don't care about anything that you guys love. And it's like I said, they didn't do any consumer research. People like myself, you guys, many other people in the Tolkien fan base are going to look at this and be like, this shares zero resemblance with anything in the books. You can look at Jackson's trilogy. Hell, you can look at the Hobbit movies. And there are aspects like the White Council, for instance, where it's like, okay, this shares some resemblance of the kind of thing that I would imagine, how this took place. How the characters behave, the dialogue that they have with each other. Even if it doesn't necessarily come from the books, you can see those characters saying X, Y, and Z. Rings of Power, you don't have any of that. It's like I said, I think poor consumer research and greed ultimately led, hey, we were talking about greed being the downfall of a lot of different things, those kind of, Feanor and Thingol and everybody else, that's what did Amazon in. They got greedy with an intellectual property that they thought they could milk the name of, and it just didn't work.
It really is. They didn't understand what they were getting into, I think. Like you said, they didn't do any market research. I'm pretty sure Jeff Bezos was quoted in saying, like, bring me Game of Thrones. And when it comes to Lord of the Rings, it's not Game of Thrones. It's not meant to be. And they're successful for different reasons. And Tolkien's stories they're timeless in a way that they touch on human emotions, like it's the human experience through a fantasy world. And he goes off of, the traditional, there's a hero, there's a journey, there's a quest. People are honorable, and as opposed to Game of Thrones where it's like there's backstabbing, this, that, like, people are dying left and right. That's not Tolkien. And when Jeff Bezos says, "Bring me Game of Thrones," and then they try to do some weird blend between modernity and Tolkien. Tolkien didn't even like the modern age that he was living in, and he was
No, he
writing,
didn't.
for something way in the past. I mean, they tried to modernize something that he didn't want to be modernized in the first place.
Exactly. And the thing of it is too is that do you guys know about what Bezos' son told him when he found out about
Yeah.
he said, "Don't F this up."
Oh,
It kind of
really?
as a warning to him because his son is a big fan of the books, and the Tolkien fan base, I've always noticed it, but when it comes to defending the honor of the books, can get a bit rabid, myself included.
Yes.
And absolutely, I'm proud of it. And he knew that, and is probably why he gave him the warning, and apparently when Rings of Power concluded, this is just hearsay, so don't take this as, the spoken word, but from what I have gathered, Bezos was incredibly angry at the lack of success the show had. And I'm honestly curious, honest to God, since we're talking about it, and I was tempted to put out a tweet about it, but since we're live and talking about it, I'm wondering if season 2 is even going to come out. And
Yeah.
the reason why I say that is because I'm thinking back to so for another property there was the movie for Batgirl that was supposed to come out.
Yeah.
It got filmed, it was completed, the post-production was completed, everything was ready to go, but there was no advertising for it, which was very odd. And people were starting to really ask questions like, where's all the footage for this show? And then abruptly, Warner Brothers just said, yeah, we're not coming out with it. And the reason why, if I recall correctly, was because the heads of the studios saw the finished product and said, ain't no way in hell we're releasing this. So
Right.
we're just going to scrap it. And I'm wondering, given the fact of, let's see here, during the filming of season 2, they managed to kill a horse, burn down part of their set. Oh yeah, they ran a horse to death.
I did hear about that. Yeah.
And then
How'd they
you
get
have the
the
whole
horses wherever they were filming? I mean, the boats clearly weren't large enough to.
Oh, don't remind me. Oh, I forgot about that. Oh,
There's like
shoot.
4
Oh,
boats, and then
there's like 4 or 5 boats, and they have like 300 horses. Get out of here with that crap. No, but considering all the turmoil, the fact that it was really rejected, damn near universally rejected by the fan base, unanimously rejected by the fan base, I should say. The studio heads are probably looking at it, and they're probably looking at, listen, we have a lot more successful shows that we can market, that we are marketing. I shared a bit of an article that I was reading the other day that came out. It was like right before the new year, where they were talking about how Rings of Power was not included in the marketing for upcoming Amazon releases for 2024.
interesting.
They did their big commercial expose of various different shows that they were going to be releasing newer seasons of, or new premieres, things like that. Rings of Power wasn't a part of any of that.
Hmm.
And
Well,
so everybody's speculating, and also they've been laying off a ton of people. And I'd like to keep in mind they dropped 450 million on one season of television, 250 million for the rights to get, which they got the rights to the appendix, which I think the Tolkien estate was laughing all the way to the bank for that one.
yeah.
And
Oh man, yeah.
and then the 200 million that they took to produce it, which they're not allowed to film in New Zealand anymore because of that. So that's another thing that took place. I don't know if you guys knew about that.
No, I
They
had no idea.
yeah, they New Zealand is not going to allow them to allow Amazon to film Rings of Power there anymore. They had to move it to the UK because the studio left like metric tons of garbage and waste
Mm.
behind.
I think I did hear that at one point.
Yeah.
Jeez.
Yeah. And then couple that with the fact that they released the first season on the anniversary of J.R.R. Tolkien's death.
Yep.
They didn't start production of the first season until after Christopher Tolkien died.
Yep.
This show in
They knew what
every
they were
sense,
doing.
well, they knew what they were doing, but it was also they were setting themselves up for disaster. You know, like unwittingly doing it because, like, you know, just greed and thinking they could milk an IP.
Yeah.
Simple as that.
Couple of things here.
Yeah.
We've got Felligund in the chat who makes a great point. He said, ultimately, it fails because something like the secret fire is antithetical to their ideology, which I think is 100% accurate.
Yeah, that is 100%.
Not something that the DEI overlords ever want to see succeed.
No.
So that's a good point. And then
Yeah.
Nerdo Perreal, apparently says that you love Rings of Power. But then he asks, do you guys think anyone will cross that line and actually attempt to make a sequel to Lord of the Rings based on the concepts Tolkien came up with? And I don't know if do you mean like the 14-page summary that he scrapped afterwards, or?
Well, there's also there's that. There's also the Dagor Dagorath, which I think has ultimately been rendered non-canon. And also, I don't think they'd even be able to get the rights to that anyway, because the Silmarillion, you'd need that. You'd need Book of Lost Tales Part 1 and 2. You'd need a whole assortment of different things to get your hands on before you did that story. Certainly, you'd need the Children of Urn, because at the end, Turambar kills Morgoth. So you need all that backstory. I think a lot of people, a lot of studios, especially Warner Brothers, because obviously you have War of the Rohirrim coming out. I think that's going to be kind of like their litmus test.
Yeah.
To see where they go, because you have a lot of different streaming outlets that are, you know, airing, kind of testing the waters with fantasy TV, and you have Warner Brothers who probably wants to test that with the Lord of the Rings properties. The Tolkien properties that they have the rights to. But after seeing Rings of Power and the backlash that occurred there, they're probably very hesitant. What they're probably going to do, they're going to keep it at a lower budget. Probably keep it. Honestly, I think depending on how War of the Rohirrim does, I think they're going to keep it predominantly animated because it's just lower costing.
Sure.
And it's honestly the safer bet. You know, a lot, especially anime has been on the rise with the decline of comic books and with a lot of shows kind of just everybody's sick of Star Wars and Marvel and the same retreaded stuff over and over and over again. Anime is on the rise, and I think you're going to see a lot more of that coming out of Warner Brothers for the Middle Earth IP, for lack of a better term. But like I said, I think War of the Rohirrim is going to be, depending on how that does, is going to be kind of how Warner Brothers is going to take things going forward, because it's them and Amazon and Middle Earth Enterprises with like the game rights and all that. So
right.
And also after Gollum, did you guys ever play the Gollum game?
That was bad.
I saw a couple people playing it. I was like, I'm not spending money on this.
Yeah, it was like back to back, just like you had Rings of Power and Gollum. This just kicked the IP in the teeth, and it was just like, you know, you have, I guarantee you have studio execs that are looking at it going like, let's be careful. You know, we don't want to repeat the same mistake that these guys did.
Yeah.
You know?
No, I think that's spot on. I will say we're kind of at our cutoff time here, so I'll let Sam take us out. But Feanor, honestly, I still don't know your actual name, which is awesome. But thank you for joining us. This was a lot of fun. We'll have to do it again at some point down the road, but it's clear that you're knowledgeable and you love Tolkien. And
yeah, except for when I can't get a stupid Barlam and Butterbur and Gandalf. Oh, I'm ashamed of myself. Oh.
We'll let you redeem yourself at some point down the road here, my friend.
Yeah, no, you know what I'm gonna do after this, right? I'm gonna power read like all the way through Lord of the Rings again for the umpteenth time, just to refresh my memory. That way, the next time I'm on here, I'll be like, I'll just have it like that. So
there you go.
Love it.
Cool.
Love it. Yes. Well, thank you very much, Feanor. This is the part of the podcast where we, as Gondor, call for aid. We ask you guys, we're lighting a beacon of our own, and we're saying, Gondor calls for aid. Will you, Rohan, answer? Please light a beacon. Like, subscribe, follow us, hit us with some more comments on the Twitter live stream. Go to YouTube, follow us there as well. Just wherever you get your podcast or your YouTube, just give us some love. And if you want to jump on the podcast like the High King himself, just shoot us up. Anyway, we love to talk Tolkien with other people. We love to debate Tolkien with other people. So whatever that looks like for you guys, we just love to hear from our listeners. We want this to be a fellowship, like we always say. So thank you for stepping out on the road with us. Until next time, we bid you a very fond farewell.